Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming to this lecture despite the, the nice weather outside. And yeah, I appreciate your sacrifice. And so I'm very happy to be there, and I would like to thank Benoit and Patricia and also Bob for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. Last time I was in this place, I was in your situation as a PhD student. And the school was co-organized by Claude. So it's a kind of cycle. So today I will present you, we'll talk about gas sensing using parametric sources. So how to use parametric sources for gas sensing application, and also how to tailor such sources to meet the requirement of gas sensing. So first, just let me give you a few words about ONERA, because maybe you don't know, most of you don't know what it is. So it's a French research center devoted to aerospace research. And I don't want to go to the detail, but we are covering a lot of research areas from fluid mechanics up to optics. And all the research is application keyed at ONERA. So we need to do research for specific applications. And in terms of optics, ONERA is quite large players in Europe, because you are more than 140 permanent researchers only working on optics, covering all the field of optics from, I would say, imaging up to laser. And I am personally in a department called Physics and Instrument Department, and this is in this department where all the activities on OPOs are carried out. So where are we? So there are several centers of research of ONERA. Where are working? It's in Palaiseau, so in 20 kilometers in the south of Paris. So not far from Paris, but far enough to from this kind of scary guy. So here you have happy scientists, and not scary. And not rude bartenders, as sometimes in Paris. And we are associated with Université Paris-Saclay, which is a big research cluster in this area. So Saclay, maybe it's not written here. Saclay is here. So this whole area is full of university and research center in France. So now here's an outline of my talk. So first, I will give you some details on about the absorption of gases. So I think that most of this is already known by you. So I will try to go fast enough to have enough time to spend more time on OPO we say details. And also we'll give you before an overview of the main gas sensing techniques using lasers, and of course using OPOs. So I think that most of you are aware that the energy level of molecules can be divided in three different terms. The first one is the electronic energy, corresponding to optical transition in the optical or UV range. So they are well separated. And inside these levels or bands, you have vibration energy and rotational energy, where purely rotational spectrum is in the microwave or far infrared, and vibration rotation spectrum is in the infrared range, and it corresponds to it is in this range where you can find most of the signatures of molecules in order to be able to detect the molecules. So just what is vibration modes of molecules? Here, in the case of carbon dioxide, you have the three vibration modes. So the first one is symmetrical elongation. Unfortunately, you cannot detect it with infrared light because it's a symmetrical. You have no variation of the dipolar momentum. And these two other modes are detectable by light, by absorption of light. In fact, for most of the molecules, all these transition energies on line intensities are already tabulated and calculated. For instance, you have the well-known ITRAN database where you can find all you need to be able to calculate the absorption lines. And what is nice, We also call this absorption line signature or molecular fingerprints. For instance, if you consider these 4 gases that you can find in the atmosphere, mostly greenhouse gases or pollutants, you can see that they have very specific absorption features, a kind of fingerprint. So if you are able to, I would say, to record this absorption spectra or only a part of it, you are able to know which molecule you are detecting and in what is its concentration. So this, for instance, this line corresponds to this vibration modes. I'm sorry, I will very often switch from wave numbers to micrometer or nanometer, because when you are speaking about spectroscopy, you usually use wave numbers, but when you are speaking about laser sources, you are more used to speak about nanometers. So just to help, 10,000 wave numbers is 1 micrometer, and 1,000 wave numbers is 10 micrometers. So here you are between, it's around 4 micrometers, the inverse of this value. Exactly what happens. You have these absorption bands, lines just above 4 micrometers. And here you have also overtones. It's twice the value. So the line intensities are smaller, but you can detect also using overtones. Sometimes it's more beneficial when you have a high concentration of gases or you want to measure over a very long path length. You will absorb everything with this one, so it's better to use this one for measurement. So other examples. So you have many fingerprints for many molecules. I don't want to, you will have the copy. And also, there are other more dangerous gases than greenhouse gases you sometimes want to detect, like chemical warfare agents. And in this case, just want to stress that to discriminate between all these very dangerous species, you have actually to have to look in this wavelength range, the long wave infrared, above 8 micrometer. So when I speak now, it looks like, okay, why not? What's the problem? The issue, but to have a tunable laser source in this wavelength range is much more difficult than in this wavelength range, actually, technologically. So just for kind of vocabulary and also to explain as a function of in which each range, what kind of application you may find. So here you have the so-called short-wave infrared, which is defined by, I did many definitions, but I choose this one I found on Wikipedia. I hope it's a good one. So you have, in this wavelength range, you mainly have overtones of greenhouse gases. So it's suitable for long-distance detection or high gas concentration. In this mid-wave infrared, you have the fundamental absorption lines of many greenhouse gases or volatile organic compounds. So many applications for air quality or related are in this wavelength range. And in the long wavelength range, it's the range where you really need to go for hazardous chemicals or chemical warfare agents. And for that, you need an infrared sources that is able to provide light in order to shine the gas and to be able to read the molecular fingerprint. So you need to shine light and then to read by active. There is also passive detection using sunlight or other, but I don't want to go to this application today. And so the main advantage of using laser is that you can use it day and night, you don't care. And also, you don't have to have a temperature difference between the gas and the backward scene, which is usually required when you use a passive method. So why parametric sources are relevant? Hopefully they are relevant, because we are here on a school devoted to parametric nonlinear optics and not to other. So here it's a very short schematic with the spectral coverage of the main available optical source technologies. Maybe it's not, if you are a real specialist of supercontinuum, you may argue that maybe you can go further. I don't know exactly, but you have here so if you look at ion-doped laser, so it's nice. If you can have direct emission from ion-doped laser, it's good because you have many energies with a good wall plug efficiency, but unfortunately you cannot detect everything with this laser. You have the well-known CO2 laser, good, but with a limited tunability. You have all the semiconductor laser, QCL, ICL, diode lasers, and so on. It's very nice. You can cover all the range actually currently with this kind of laser. So actually, they can compete with other, for instance, with OPO for local gas sensing in some cases. But nevertheless, they are very limited in terms of energies, because it's not a medium where you store energy, so you cannot be able to deliver high energy pulse with semiconductor lasers. So anyway, you will need a parametric amplifier if you want to increase the energy. And fiber supercontinuum sources are more recent technology. It's very interesting. You can cover a very broad range, but you are also still limited in terms of pulse energy, because it's usually a waveguide structures. And also, all your energy is spread over a wide spectrum. So sometimes also it's not good to spread all your energy on such a wide spectrum, because you need sometimes to look only in a restricted window. And parametric sources, it's very nice. You can cover all the range, and it is energy scalable. Of course, it's not that simple, but you potentially can go everywhere. And to do an OPO, you have to take care of the material. I don't want to take too much time, because many speakers already present you this kind of graph. And also this evening, you will have a special presentation on nonlinear materials. So just what you... Some of you, maybe? I don't know. Some of you. And you have to be more... The point is that below typically 4 or 5 micrometers, you have very mature materials off the shelf. So you can use PPLIN, PPKTP, KTP, and so on. So it's, you already have a good presentation this morning on these materials. But if you want to go above, at longer wavelengths, it's less mature materials, or at least much less widespread materials, because only few countries are able to grow and fabricate these materials, because they are, as you can imagine, highly related to military application. And the most efficient and the most mature, I would say, are ZGP and orientation pattern gallium arsenide. I think that Marty Fire already presents you this material. So now a short overview of all the active optical gas sensing techniques you can find. So first I will discuss about local gas sensing, and then technique for standoff detection. So let's go back to the basic very shortly. So the absorption of light, the linear absorption of light is given by the well-known Beer-Lambert law. So you have an exponential decrease of the intensity of the light depending on what we call the optical depth. And this optical depth is related to the feature of the absorption line of the gas. So here, this first term, the volumetric density, in fact, you can just talk about concentration of the gas. The line intensity gives you the strength of the line. It depends on mainly on the temperature. So if you change the temperature, the relative strength of the lines will change, because you have the Boltzmann distribution that will give you the repartition. And you have the line shape, and L is just the interaction length, so the length of where your gas is. So if you change pressure and temperature, you will change this line profile. At low pressure, you have Doppler broadening, and you mainly have Gaussian line shape, while at high pressure or atmospheric pressure, the line is more Lorentzian line shape, and it's broader. And as I already said, the intensity changes with temperature. So just to illustrate this line broadening effect, here you have a measurement on this gas at 2 pressure, so 10 millibar or 100 millibar. You can clearly see the broadening of the line. And here you have a calculation on a carbon dioxide line for several pressure. You also change the path length to make easier the comparison. What you could notice, all the rotational features are disappeared when you increase the pressure. And also at atmospheric pressure, if the lines are close together, like in this case, you will have an overlap between all the lines. So it's difficult to find off or a spectral spot where you have no absorption. Here you are always absorbed. And the variation of pressure actually is very important. For instance, if you want to do airborne or spaceborne measurements, you have to take into account this variation of pressure with altitude, because at the upper atmosphere, you will have mostly a narrow line with sub-gigahertz or gigahertz line with Doppler broadening, and when you increase the pressure or lower the altitude, you will have a line broadening. And typically, at atmospheric pressure, most of the greenhouse gases have line widths of few gigahertz. So it's gigahertz, it's no more wave numbers. So to help, one wave number is 30 gigahertz. So the mostly simple approach is just you have a laser, you have a detector, and you send light through a gas cell. And then you have at least two wavelengths, one which is called the on wavelength on the absorption line of the gas you want to detect, and the other one called the off wavelength, which is out any absorption line. You don't want to be spoiled by other gases, so you have to take care of these two lines. You need at least these two lines. And then if you really have an off and an on, and you are sure that no other gas interferes, using the previous, so you can measure very easily the optical depth, and then if you know pressure, temperature, and the length of your gas cell, you are able to recover the gas concentration. Of course, if you have a gas mixture, it's more difficult because you have to inverse the problem. You need at least to have one wavelength for each gas, for n on wavelengths if you have n gas, plus at least one off wavelength. And you have to do some fitting using typical approach like least square minimization or maximum likelihood estimation, which is a more elaborate approach. I don't know personally all the details. Just what I understand, it was with this method you can be able to reach the Kramer-Rao bonds, which are the best possible measurements you can do. So just to illustrate, here you have some experimental data points we actually measured in the lab. Using another technique I will present later, what you just have to know, it's for a 60-meter path length, just the atmosphere. So you have this point. So now you are, with this point, you would like to be able to know what gas species you have in the room. So you use Itron, you do some modeling. Here we consider only methane and water vapor, because in this spectral range, they are the mostly important gases. And using this theoretical spectrum, you just do a fitting. Here it's with a maximum likelihood approach, algorithm. And also you have here, the measurement is not perfect. So usually it's very difficult to maintain a baseline equal to a constant value over the whole wavelength range, because you usually have a variation of the spectral transmission between your reference path and your measurement path, because you need always two paths, one path for normalization. And so you have in your algorithm to take into account this baseline. What we did here using a second-order polynomial baseline. So actually, we fit 5 parameters, 2 for the gases and 1 for this baseline in your computer, and then you do the algorithm, and you are able to measure. So it's more clear if you just plot the contribution of water vapor and methane. So with all this wavelength, you are able to measure these two species simultaneously, which is a good point, because if you want to measure methane, in fact, you are polluted or you have interference from water vapor. So the best approach is to measure both. And that's what we did. For water vapor, it's easy. You can compare it with an hygrometer. So we have a nice agreement between the two values. So it's great. And for methane, we don't have any methane meter in the lab. I don't know if it exists. But we measure a value that is consistent with the standard methane concentration in the atmosphere. Okay. So now I'll go back to more to the technique. So you have basically two approaches. The first one, actually the one we used previously, is to use a narrow line width source and then just to tune the source and to record the absorption as function of the tuning of the source. And the good point is that you have all the power of your source at each data point. So for the signal-to-noise ratio is good. On the other side, you need to tune the source, so you can take some time. The other approach is to use a broadband source to send your broadband source toward your gas cell. Then you have a spectrum of your broadband source with the absorption line of the gas. It's very similar to FTIR spectrometry. So unless you are not using a black body source, but you are using other kind of source, such a continuum. And if you are able to measure your reference spectrum and your transmitted spectrum, you can easily have your absorption spectrum. But in this case, if you want to have the same signal-to-noise ratio for each wavelength channel, you need much more power. For instance, if you want to have 100 data points, so typically a 0.1 wave number around the 100 wave number span, you would need 1 watt to have the same power in each channel as only with a 1 milliwatt tunable laser. So usually you need to have more power. And suppression of the baseline requires to record the reference spectrum of the source. And sometimes it's not that easy, because if you want to use a supercontinuum or a parametric generator, you will have a strong fluctuation from shot to shot of your spectrum. And so you cannot just record once a reference spectrum and only use it. So you have to record in the same times, usually your reference spectrum and your transmission spectrum. Then to improve your measurement, we'll say accuracy, you can, especially if you want to measure trace gases, people, maybe you already heard about that, people are usually using a multipass. The easier way is to use a multipass cell, just to pass several times your beam in your gas in order to have more optical depth. In this case, you need to have quite good mirrors. For instance, if you have a cell with 200 reflection, which is actually one of the biggest value you can have, you need to have good mirror, because with a mirror of 0.99, you will only have almost 15% at the output. In this case, you can detect part per million sensitivity, typically. To have more sensitivity, you can use other technique based on cavity. The one is cavity ring-down spectroscopy. So in this case, you have a highly resonant cavity. You couple your light in the cavity. So you need to have a wavelength that corresponds to a mode of the cavity. And then you switch. So you switch on your laser. Then you fill the cavities. And when all the light is inside the cavity, you can switch off your light or switch off the wavelengths easily, rapidly, and then you can measure the ring-down time, the photon length time with the photodetector of the light leaking out of your cavity. And if you put gas in your cavity, or if you change the wavelengths to be in the wavelengths absorbed by the gas, you will have a different ring-down time, and so you can also recover the absorption using this approach. It's a very sensitive approach. One of the most sensitive, I think, optical technique to measure gas concentration, down to a part per trillion. But it is highly demanding in the quality of the mirror. You don't need 99, but you need 99.999 something to have several kilometer path length. And also, if you want to do it on a broad wavelength range, to be able to do multi-gas detection, it's not that easy, because you also will need a broadband mirrors with high reflectivity. And last point, your spectral resolution, of course, is given by the free spectral range of the cavity. So at low pressure, it could be an issue as well. Last local measurement technique is photoacoustic spectrometry. So it's based on the photoacoustic effect that was discovered by Graham Bell, on one of the discovered, because it's not that simple. There were 3 guys almost in the same times that discovered photoacoustic. So photoacoustic effect, if you send light, modulated light absorbed by a gas, you will generate a sound. And this effect was discovered by Graham Bell, and then it was used for laser spectroscopy by Kreuzer in Bell Labs. So there is a kind of 100th century connection between the two discoveries. Both are related to Bell. so just to explain the process, so you send light. Light has to be modulated or pulsed. So the light is absorbed by the gas. Then you have some non-radiative deactivation between the molecules that generate a local heating. And this heating generates the cycle of adiabatic expansion and compression due to this modulated absorption generate a pressure wave or just sound that you can detect with a microphone. Of course, if you just use a microphone like this one, you won't have a very high sensitivity. So you need to add a resonant. The basic approach is to use an acoustical resonator in order to enhance your detection. Just want to add that it looks very indirect because you have light, heat, sound process, but actually it's very sensitive, almost as sensitive as the cavity ring-down spectroscopy. Another good approach is that you measure an acoustical wave. So whatever the wavelength of your light beam, you will detect a sound. So even if you are in the long wave infrared, you will have the same kind of detector as in the short wave infrared. And if you consider detection of light, you won't have the same kind of technology because in the long wave, you will need mercury cadmium telluride, nitrogen-cooled detectors, which are much less convenient than in the short wave infrared. And also, it's a baseline-free process. Without absorption, you have no signal. So it's easier than transmission, where you have a strong baseline, and then you want to measure absorption in this strong high baseline. So just here, it's a picture of a typical optical resonator. I don't want to go to the detail, but it's very sensitive to background noise. So it's background noise. So you have to take care to isolate about the background noise. I don't want to go to the details on this. Just want to illustrate that the more power you have, the more sensitivity you have. More recently, people also developed what so-called quartz-enhanced photoacoustic spectroscopy, or QUIPAS. Maybe you already heard about it. The basic idea is to exchange the microphone and to use, instead of a microphone, a quartz tuning fork. So quartz tuning fork are well known for music. So you hit your tuning fork and you generate a sound, a note for playing piano, for instance. And here it's the opposite. You generate the sound to excite the resonator. So it's mainly based on quartz tuning forks. Initially, people are using quartz you can have in your watch, but now, chez Atonara, we are involved in the development of tailored quartz resonator with colleagues that works on this topic for other applications. Also, you can, of course, so the quartz tuning fork is instead of the microphone, so you can also add an acoustical resonator to enhance, again, the signal-to-noise ratio. And another good aspect of this quartz approach is that you have a very high quality factor in this kind of resonator. So you can really filter out all the noise much more efficiently than with a conventional microphone. It's a good point. Yeah. But you are sensitive to temperature variation because your resonant frequency will change a little bit. And since you have a very high quality factor, you really need to synchronize your modulation of light with the resonance of the quartz cell. So I want to skip that. So now I will move to techniques for standoff detection. So the simpler way is to use absorption spectroscopy and put your receiver very far from your emitter, but it's not very convenient. Usually you want to have receiver and emitter in the same location. So you can use a corner cube or retroreflector that will reflect your light back to the receiver. In fact, this kind of approach is very often used to monitor some places where, for instance, if you want to measure gaze above a lake, you can put a retroreflector on the other side of the other bank of the lake and your laser, and you can do some measurement. But in many applications, you don't want to have to put a corner cube on the other side because you really want to be remote and to measure something without going to the place you are doing the measurement. So in this case, you can use standoff detection. The first, simpler, the more easy one is to use what we call topographical target. So it could be a wall, a tree, a building, ground surface, whatever. So then you send your light on this topographical target, and you use the light scattered by this target to measure the absorption. So it's an integrated absorption. So if you use a single detector, people are usually talking about integrated path differential absorption LiDAR. So here you are emitting at least on lambda on and lambda off, and then you measure the absorption over the full 2 times the length L. And you can also use as a detector a camera. In this case, usually of course your detection range is not the same, but you can have what people call backscattering gas imaging, so you can measure really gas leak. I will have more illustrative example later. So the good point, you don't need any retroreflector because you use what is in the scene you want to look at. But you need much more power because in this case, your receiver signal decreases as the square of the length. This is for parametric sources. This is currently a very important technique because it is this approach that is currently selected for spaceborne measurement of greenhouse gases. The idea is to put a LiDAR in a satellite and then to send light and to use the light reflected by the ground to measure the absorption of gases. And parametric sources are among the technologies that are currently selected for this kind of future space mission. And in this case, you can, so you are eating from the satellite, so even if it's an integrated measurement, you can nevertheless be able to measure. What you want is to measure the gas close to the ground in order to be able to understand the influence of people on the emission of gases, or to be able to measure gas wheel or gas where the gas is emitted. So what you do, you don't send your own wavelength on the maximum of your line, but you send it here in the wing. So in this case, you will be much more absorbed close to the ground than in the upper atmosphere. Here you have an example of the relative weight. This, the square corresponds to an emission in the maximum absorption of the line. Here in the case of water vapor, I think here. And you can see that the weight is much larger for low pressure. So all of your laser will be mostly absorbed by the upper atmosphere. It's what you don't want. Instead, if you emit light in these wings, you can be able to have most of the absorption close to the ground. So it is what it's used for measurement of greenhouse gases from space. But it's very stringent because you really need to have a very high stability of your wavelengths, because you are not here. You are on the maximum, so it's not a big deal if you move a little bit. Here, if you move a little bit, you will change a lot your measurement. So you have several approaches. Lambda off and the lambda on really that has been really highly stabilized below 1 megahertz. In this case, you need very high energy pulses, so you are usually using nanosecond pulses. So you have typically 10 nanosecond pulses. So even if it's Fourier transform limited, the bandwidth is around 50 megahertz. So you have to stabilize this 50 megahertz pulse. So you have this pulse. Here you have typically 50 megahertz, but you need to have this maximum, should not move, should be at 1 megahertz or below 1 megahertz. So you really need to stabilize your with a much higher precision than your bandwidth. And then last technique before moving to OPOs. So it's the range resolved differential absorption LiDAR, which is the techniques that provides you the more information. In this case, you use scattering by aerosol to do your LiDAR measurement, so you have access to the distribution. Because, for instance, you send your light here, it's scattered by aerosol, and the signal you detect, if you consider the speed of light and the time of flight to go from this position, go back to the detector, you can map here you have a map of your aerosol distribution. If you here with lambda off, and then you can send lambda on, which that will be also absorbed. And depending on the relative shape of these two curves, you can recover the absorption of gases. I have in the next slide a more better example to explain this. In this case, we'll say the big issue is you really need at least several millijoule per pulse, minimum, to be able to have enough signal from the aerosol. But the good point is that you have the spatial resolution. And this resolution is given by your pulse duration or your detector response time. The best is to have the two of them fitted together. So with 10 nanoseconds, I don't remember, but it says you will have 3 meters or 1.5 meters of resolution typically. Here you have an example. For instance, if you send light here, I steal it from NIST website. So you send your light. So in blue, you have the on signal, and in green, the off. So at the beginning, there is no cloud of CO2. So the two signals are similar. And then you cross this first plume, and you have absorption of the on resonance. Then after this plume, you have no more absorption, so they are almost parallel to each other. And then another plume that will only impact the on resonance. So in log scale, you have this more clear graph. And then by inversion, you can recover the absorption of CO2 in these two, and you know where it is. Okay, so it's typically the idea. So here, I just want too much information, more for your information on the PDF. Just depending on if you want to do point detection, short range or long range, typically the energy you need. For point detection, you need typically few milliwatt to sometimes watt or more if you use a broadband source. For short range, typically you need a few microjoule, and for long range, the best is to have more than 10 millijoules. So it gives you an idea of the size of the laser you need. And here, it's detection sensitivity as a function of the application. So the less stringent applications are transport pollutant, greenhouse gases, because you already measure gases that are at least at the ppm level in the atmosphere, so you don't need to have you don't need to detect them at the part per billion. For air quality control, you need to go to this part per billion to measure, for instance, formaldehydes or other gases. So it's ppbv, so it's part per billion per volume unit. So it's sometimes people or me only use ppm or ppb, but actually it's ppmv. And part per trillion, it's very, very difficult. And one big application is to monitor ammonia vapor in for semiconductor industry, because if there is some trace of ammonia in this kind of place where they are making all the electronic circuits, it can damage a lot. So they have to monitor it live and with such high resolution. So now I move to parametric source. Maybe I will try to do a break between these two, because otherwise I will spend much more time after the break than before. So I will talk about continuous wave parametric source for gas sensing. So now I present you all these techniques and know how to be able to carry out precise, good measurement using parametric sources. So the easier way is to use difference frequency generation, because you can use two. For instance, in this case, you have two lasers, two telecom grade lasers. So they are highly mature lasers. You mix them in a nonlinear crystal, and you can send it in a multipass cell and be able to detect gas with the ppb level. So it's nice. But nevertheless, you need two lasers, and you need a watt level laser to have only less than a milliwatt in the. So it's in terms of footprint or power consumption, it's not a very efficient approach. With an OPO, for instance, you will need only one laser to have usually better power. So you know where I want to go then. Anyway, so you have But the good approach is that you can use, here it's not an OPO, so you don't have to reach any oscillation threshold, so you can use any materials, even poor nonlinear materials that absorb the load can produce some DFG. It's not the case of UpGas, but just here to illustrate that this approach has also been used for long-wave infrared using orientation pattern gallium arsenide with a quite similar approach, but of course you have to use a laser at longer wavelengths. And then using several QPM period and changing the wavelengths of the pump, you are able here in these publications from Sandia Labs in collaboration with Stanford University, they were able to cover a wide wavelength range here from 7 micron to 9.5. And using that, they were able to do some cavity ground spectroscopy with a fairly good resolution. It's not the resolution, I think it's the concentration of gas. The resolution was better. So you have milliwatt or sub-milliwatt power with watt power of pump. So you would like to improve this. So one approach, we have a talk this morning on this, is to use waveguide QPM. So in this case, you can have more than a milliwatt with few hundred of milliwatt of input power, or sometimes less. But the problem for gas sensing is that you need also to have a tunable DFG wavelengths. So if you use a single waveguide, usually you have with a single QPM period, you can tune it with temperature, but it's not, usually you are quite limited in terms of tuning. In the previous slide, you see that they have to use many periods of QPM to be able to cover a wide range. Here you have only one period usually, or you have to move your crystal and maintain a good coupling in each waveguide, which is not that easy. So there is a quite with a smart solution. Of course, you lose some efficiency. That was quite recently developed at NTT Corporation in Japan. They use a chirped QPM in their waveguide. And in this way, they have a much broader QPM tuning acceptance. And so they were able to have, using the same waveguide without changing the temperature, they were able to tune here the signal over 10 nanometer wavelength range. So it's much more than what they can have with a uniform waveguide. And so they use it to, in this case, to measure simultaneously methane and ethylene with a single waveguide. The efficiency was fortunately not that good, and I don't see new paper on this topic, so maybe there were some issues that were not clearly explained here. But nevertheless, it's a good idea to have this broad acceptance using chirped QPM. So to summarize on different frequency generation source, so the advantage you do not need to reach any oscillation threshold, as I already said. You can use mature technology, but the limitation, you need two lasers, one of them being tunable. So anyway, the tunability of your DFG is at the end limited by the tunability of your laser. So you are not using the full potential of your nonlinear materials for tunability. And the efficiency is limited with bulk crystal. And you can have high efficiency in waveguide, but your power is limited. But it's not, it could be sufficient for what I said. But there is no so much mature or high-end device using this approach currently for gas sensing. So now I'll move to continuous wave OPOs. So the good thing with continuous wave OPO for spectroscopy or gas sensing is that even if you do nothing, you need to have a narrow line with pump and not to pump it too far above the threshold, but it's naturally single mode because it's really similar to an homogeneous loop broadened laser gain, maybe more than a real. I'm not sure that with laser medium you really have such homogeneous broadening. So if you pump it and wait, it will be single mode. But it's not sufficient because you need to control this single mode emission. You don't want your OPO to do mode hops from one mode to the other. So the usual approach is to insert an étalon in your cavity. So here you have a typical continuous wave OPO cavity. Here it's a ring ring cavity. So you have a focused arm here with your crystal and the collimated arms with the Etalon here. And using this Etalon, you can force the emission on this mode. And if you are stable enough, your OPO can run for hours on this single mode. And so, but for spectroscopy, you want to tune. You don't want to just to have this single mode emission. So actually, the more efficient and the more widely used technique is pump wavelength tuning. So in this case, what you do, you keep the Etalon in order to fix the oscillating signal mode, so you don't change this wavelength. And in this way, since you have the conservation of energy, your idler frequency or wavelengths will follow your pump. So in this way, you are able to tune your OPO. So you have many works have been done in the Boller, a group of Bollers that you already talked about this morning. So in this paper, they add a fiber amplifier to have more power, and they managed to tune the OPO, typically in a wavelength range of 5 wave number or 150 gigahertz. And recently, in this paper, in Jean-Jacques Zondy group, they managed to have a mode-up-free tuning over 75 wave numbers, quite using here there is an extended cavity laser diode amplified, and then they tune it, and they managed to have this very broad tuning range. But if you want to tune it on a broader range, what you do, you tune your pump laser to do this tuning, and then you just change your Etalon angle to change the wavelength of your signal, and so you can extend your tuning. And of course, if you want to have even broader tuning, you have also to change. You can change your QPM period, for instance. So, few examples. So, in fact, I would like to highlight that a lot of work on the use of continuous wave OPO for this application on sensing, gas sensing, has been done in Radboud University in Frans Haren Group in the Netherlands. They really do a huge amount of job. When I prepare this lecture, I look at the literature. Really, there are maybe, don't know, but more than 80% of the paper came from this group of, I would say, practical implementation with real results. So here, in fact, they collaborate with Twente University from Boller's group to use this approach of you have a DBR, fiber amplifier, and an OPO with an Etalon inside. And with this device, here they use it's I don't remember. It's integrated cavity output spectroscopy. It's a kind of also cavity enhanced approach. I did not detail, but you also benefit from the multipass in your cell. And using this, they were able to measure exhaled human breath. So here they measure carbon, water vapor and methane that you emit when you exhale and inhale. And you can see here clearly in this graph that you are able to resolve exhalation and inhalation cycle from a subject. And they also use, this time using photoacoustic spectroscopy, they were also able to measure breathing from small insects. So here it's an ant. Just imagine the experiment, just to punt an ant in this. But you can see that they clearly see this cycle of carbon dioxide emission. I was not aware that there was a kind of breathing because they don't have they are not breathing like us, the insect. Anyway, there is a kind of cycle. So it's funny to see that you are able to detect this. They also did it on fruit flies. So a good point also with singly resonant OPO. All of these OPO were singly resonant. It's a quite mature technology. Here you have a device also from Radboud University. And also you can find very efficient and mature commercial product. Here an example of the laser from Aculite, so based on Piplin, where it's a continuous wave laser, and you are able to cover a broad range up to 4.5, limited by the absorption of Piplin. But all of these lasers are using a watt level pump. So if you want to pump them with a lower pump power, you can use a doubly resonant OPO, also investigated by Aculite. in this case, you can have a very low oscillation threshold, so you can pump directly with a conventional diode laser. They demonstrate it. But you are very sensitive to loss to maintain this very low threshold. So in fact, they use 3 separate sets of mirrors to be able to cover this range. And to have a stable single mode emission, they really have to stabilize this setup, because you need to have simultaneously an idler mode and a signal mode resonant in the cavity and satisfying the conservation of energy in the same time. So it could be quite difficult. I will explain later how to circumvent this issue, how we do it on ERA. But they managed in a way to have a very low oscillation threshold, a very compact device. They managed to measure here the absorption line of carbon monoxide. But anyway, this approach was not widespread, so I think it was not so easy, because the laser product they are selling is a singly resonant OPO and not this approach they investigate first. And one last approach on continuous wave OPO is the so-called pump resonant or pump enhanced cavity. Here you have an example from Bonn and Düsseldorf University. Here in this cavity, you have one mirror on the crystal. M1 is another mirror reflecting the pump. So you have your pump that is, we'll say, trapped in the cavity. So you enhance a lot the field of your pump. So you have much more power in the crystal than the incoming pump power from the laser, because you enhance it in the cavity. And then they use a dual cavity approach with the signal resonating between this mirror and this mirror. And so you can control independently signal and pump. They use also an Etalon. And this way, they have a oscillation threshold below 400 milliwatt, which is also quite good. Not as low as with double resonance, but this device has been actually used for sensing of gases using cavity Likhaud spectroscopy or photoacoustic spectroscopy. And in this case, in this paper, they only tune by rotating the Etalon, so they do mode op tuning, but it was enough because in terms of spacing was typically half a gigahertz to measure lines of 5 gigahertz, so it was enough for them to resolve the line. But I'm quite sure that pump tuning could be feasible if you tune in the same time this piezo. And then to finish on this continuous wave OPO, I just want to underline other applications for standard gas detection. Here I only talk about local gas detection. So at Sandia Labs, they developed a very interesting approach, which I already mentioned, backscattered gas imaging. So you have the first experiment, they put the OPO in a van, and they scanned the scene, and so they were able to detect if there is a gas leak with a limited air detection range of 10 meters typically. But it is mounted on a vehicle. Here you have typical performance of the OPO. But to really go to gas or to refinery facilities, it's better to have a man-held system. So then they developed an operator portable gas imager based on a fiber pumped continuous wave OPO. So you can see here the same picture as the one I showed you before. So this guy managed to see this gas leak. But you have to be anyway not to be quite athletic guy, because the weight of this blue box is 12 kilograms. So it's a pack of milk or in your shoulder, and then you have a backpack of 7 kilograms. So anyway, you have to be well trained, but it works. And to finish, just want to show you here a nice result from University of St. Andrew, where they use here it's also pump enhanced OPO tuned by the Etalon. So actually, they do not scan a full line; they just select a mode of the OPO that is absorbed by methane, and they do some nice, then they send the OPO here, and they do some scanning to measure an image, and they do a very nice, in this publication you can find very nice movie. Here you can see the image with the OPO system, and you can see methane clearly emitted by this tube. And here you have in the same time the, sorry, it's not, there is a delay between because of the computer. But you can see that you see nothing if you look in the visible range. While if you have high at 3.3 micrometer, you can see this emission of methane. I don't know if it's what allowed to smoke in the lab because with methane, but anyway, it's a very nice, because it's really almost it's with I would say video frame rate. They managed to have this picture. So to summarize, and just before to have a short break, so continuous wave OPO for gas sensing, they are widely used for spectroscopy in gas sensing because it's easy to have single mode emission, which is good for to be able to measure absorption lines. You can have a quite high conversion efficiency in continuous wave regime with OPO. Conversely, in contrast to DFG, you only need one pump laser with typically the same power as anyway the laser you will need for DFG. But the limitation is mainly in terms of wavelengths, because you are very sensitive to loss in your cavity. So you need to have high quality mirrors and high quality nonlinear materials to make continuous wave OPO work properly. And that's why I think that there is no, maybe I'm wrong, but I never find in the literature a continuous wave OPO emitting above 5 micrometer, even when they are based on more exotic materials. So this is one issue. Maybe the next step for continuous wave OPO is to be able to have continuous wave OPO in this longer wavelength range. And here you have just summarized typical value for singly or doubly resonant or pump enhanced OPO. So we can have a break of 5 minutes before. So now I will talk about pulsed OPO and then mode-locked OPO. Of course, mode-locked OPO are also pulsed OPO, but I will say when I'm talking about pulsed OPO, it's more nanosecond regime or transient regime OPOs, while mode-locked OPO are very different because it's really steady states and the pulse are connected to each other, coherent to each other. So first, OPG. So there is a paper from Canada, from Institut National d'Optique and Université Laval, where they talk about a device where they want to use pulsed optical parametric generation for gas sensing, but they want to use it the same way as people are using supercontinuum. And there, we'll say, what they claim is that you want to measure several gas lines, and usually you don't need to have a very broad spectrum. You prefer to have your energy typically on a moderate bandwidth of 10 to 100 nanometers and not 1 micrometer. And so that's why they investigate this OPG. But they want to have some control of the spectrum, because as I said before, from pulse to pulse, your spectrum will change a lot because it is initiated by parametric fluorescence or quantum noise. For people that are not doing quantum mechanics, they are talking about quantum noise like garbage you don't want to look inside. But the good term is parametric fluorescence. I don't know exactly. I have the Pope of this person. So they seed. They have an OPG, and they seed it with several seed sources. It was quite efficient device. They use a sub-nanosecond pump source in a 40 millimeter long pipeline, and they have typically 50% of conversion efficiency. So it's an efficient device. It's not OPG. You imagine some few percent of conversion. Yeah, it's a really high conversion efficiency, similar as the one you will have with an OPO. And they seed it with several approaches. I only here select the ones that they claim to be the better. So they use a superluminescent diode amplified in fibers with broadband filters to have a 50 nanometer seed laser. And they seed it in the OPG. And here you have the average spectrum with and then without CEDAR. So it's not a revolution. You have almost the same spectrum. But then, more interestingly, they look at the noise. And here I have to explain what it is. They called it relative standard deviation. So actually, they record 300 successive pulses. And at each wavelength channel of the spectrometer, they calculate the standard deviation of the wavelength relatively to the central wavelength. So with a perfectly reproducible spectrum from pulse to pulse, this will be equal to 0 at any wavelength. So the higher it is, the more noise you have. So with an unseeded OPG pumped at twice the nominal power, they have this quite noisy because you have 20% typically of variation of energy from shot to shot in each channel. And then if you increase the pump energy, you lower this noise owing to saturation. Since you have saturation in your parametric amplification, you have less noise. And when they seed it, they manage to reduce even further this noise. But nevertheless, they still have 10%. It's not negligible. So with this approach, so they use this OPG, they send it on a hard target. So they do kind of IPDL approach, and they measure the telescope and send it to a spectrograph. And they do with a resolution of 0.7 nanometer, which is a limit for a little bit large, but enough, nevertheless, to do some measurement at atmospheric pressure. And they average about 1,000 pulses. So it's a quite large average. And here you have the spectrum they obtain. Here for carbon dioxide and water vapor at 2 micrometers. So it is an overtone, so it absorbs only few percent, and it's very noisy. And this noise is really due to the OPG noise that generate features that could look like absorption lines. So here it's quite difficult to be really able to measure. Nevertheless, you can do some fit, but it's still noisy. They did the same at 3.3 micrometer with methane and water vapor. It's better because you have more absorption of water vapor, so you have a better view of the line, but nevertheless, it's still noisy. And they also did measurement where they use a reference spectrum. So in this case, they use their system. They record a spectrum. And then they use, for instance, they release some methane as a gas leak on the beam path. And in this case, they can reference, using their reference spectrum, they clearly improve the detection limits. They claim to detect 1 ppm meter, which is actually very high resolution for methane. So, but they agree that to really be able to do standoff measurement of atmosphere without measuring a gas leak, they need to be able to record simultaneously the reference spectrum and the measurement spectrum, meaning that you need to have 2 spectrometers or two. It's not that simple. So let's wait. It's a recent result. But it is nevertheless an interesting approach to use parametric generation. Another approach, which is more amplification than generation, has been developed at NASA. And it's also for detection of greenhouse gases, but in this case, they seed with a very narrow line width. The OPG is seeded with a DFB laser to have a narrow line width. And they developed several systems with emitting at several wavelengths to be able to detect water vapor or methane in the first overtone, CO2 in the first overtone, methane at the strong absorption line here, and also carbon monoxide here. And with conversion efficiency, which is similar as the previous paper. Here you have only 15% with CO because you begin to be absorbed in the pipeline. And but the issue in this case, because they are working for the NASA, so they are also thinking about this kind of application, and it's that when even if they are below the so-called OPG threshold, if it means something, you can observe that with the pump full pump energy, you have a broadening of your line. So you have some noise that is induced by the OPG. So they need to improve it. Or actually, recently they moved to OPO, but it was just to illustrate this, this approach. But they did a very interesting experiment because they put the LiDAR on a building, and they use two targets. Half collaborative target is automotive reflective tape. One at 200 meters from the building, the other one at 1.5 kilometers. And they did a measurement and compare to weather stations. So you have here, you have for instance, the measurement of methane with at two distance using two systems, one at 3 micrometers and the other one at 1.6. And you have also the in situ measurement, and you have a better correlation between measurement carried out at a short distance with the in situ, which is expected actually. And they were able to measure cycle of carbon dioxide. That is due because there is trees here, so there is a respiration of the trees. And also you have a variation of carbon monoxide that they relate to car traffic activity. It's also measure water vapor, but I don't want to show everything. It's a good agreement as well. But nevertheless, since they are thinking about spaceborne applications, there are some limitations with this approach. It's seeded approach, so your wavelength is limited by the available of seed laser. If you want to go at wavelengths where you don't have a seed laser at the signal or the idler wavelengths, it won't work. For spaceborne application, you need to scale it up to a sub-millijoule level, which could be difficult and also to maintain a narrow line width in the same time. And this line width is okay. This one could be okay to measure on Earth, but if you want to do, for instance, measure on a Martian atmosphere, it won't work anymore because the pressure is much smaller. Okay, so now I move to OPO. So there is the first issue with pulsed OPO is a line width, because for gas sensing you need a narrow line width, while a simple singly resonant OPO, or simply resonant OPO, which makes sense in French, maybe not in English, because it's the same word for singly and simply in France is the same. And in this case, you have a transient regime. So I told you that in continuous wave regime, you have naturally a single mode emission. It is not anymore the case in pulsed regime, because the mode competition does not fully develop, and so typically your OPO will emit a multi-mode spectrum. There are several modes that will oscillate in your OPO. And also, OPO cavity are usually made as short as possible to have the maximum round trip time in your OPO cavity during pumping. And so the intermode spacing is usually several gigahertz, or is also not very efficient to sample absorption lines. So basically, this kind of OPO is not very useful for gas sensing if you do nothing. And moreover, if you look at the pulse-to-pulse spectrum, since it is initiated by quantum noise, you will have a distribution between the modes that will change a lot from pulse to pulse. So you will have to average if you want to have a nice pulse spectrum. Here you have also a very nice experiment that has been carried out in Kaiserslautern University in the Wallenstein group, where they use a straight camera image of the spectrum. So here, in this dimension, you have the wavelength. In the other one, you have the time. So you can have direct spectrogram of your OPO. So here you can see that during the pulse, typically it's 10 nanosecond duration, all the modes that were initially seeded by the quantum noise were continue to oscillate. But if you pump with a high pump intensity, below 2 times threshold, you will have some conversion and band conversion effect that will also add some noise in your spectrum. This is very nice experimental results. You could really see really a direct measurement of your PO spectrum. So now I just want to detail the main approaches to narrow the emission, because you want to have a single mode emission. So the first one I would like to present is injection seeding. then a more, we'll say, traditional approach based on intracavity, the insertion of intracavity wavelength elements. And then the approach we have been developed at Onera since for more than 10 years now, or 15 years. It's the dual cavity doubly resonant scheme. So injection seeding, the principle, most of you know it because it's quite similar to laser approach. It has been developed in the early days of nonlinear optics in 1969, the first publication on narrow line width single mode OPO by injection seeding. So basically, you couple a single frequency, single mode seed laser in your OPO. And instead of starting from quantum noise, you start the oscillation from the seed power. And so you can manage to have a narrow line width emission. The process can be summarized as written here. So the seeded mode starts to deplete the pump first and deprive the unseeded modes of gain. And so you slow down the unseeded mode oscillation. If you are successful in your injection seeding, during your pump pulse, you can have only really a single frequency that oscillate. Of course, you need to servo-lock your OPO cavity to the seeder. And also, I will detail it a bit more later, but you really need as well to be very close to perfect phase matching or quasi-phase matching. Otherwise, your seeding will fail. Here you have, from the same paper, you have the influence of the seeding power. So without seeding, you have a multimode emission, and then you have to have enough seeding power to really suppress the side modes. So here you have several spectrogram from low seeding power to here successful seeding power with 5 milliwatt in this case. Also, you don't have to pump too high, because if you pump too high above threshold, you also will have some multimode emission, of course. So just to explain a little bit more about this process. So here, without seeding, you will have, you pump your OPO. So the input pump is this rectangular shape. When the OPO starts to oscillate, you will start to deplete the pump, and you have the other modes that will oscillate. And then you have some mode competition, but as I said, mode competition does not have enough time to take place, so you will have this multimode emission. So otherwise, if you seed properly here at the maximum, at the perfect phase matching, you, as I said, you will start earlier because you start from not from a very low parametric fluorescence, but from something much higher. So your OPO threshold will be reduced, and as I said, the other mode won't have enough time to oscillate. And if you are successful, you already have a single mode emission. So there is some tolerance. If you do not seed exactly at the maximum at delta k equal to 0, but close to delta k equal to 0, this mode actually 0 has higher gain than the mode you are seeding. So in continuous wave regime, it's useless to seed, and at the end, this one will take all. The winner will take all here, and you will finally eventually oscillate on this omega S0. But since your pump pulse has a finite duration, you will manage to have a negligible power in these modes. And so you manage to have a single mode emission during the time of pumping. And the longer the pump, the more critical is this criterion. So you need to seed as close. The longer the pump, at the end, you only can seed at the delta k is equal to 0. And if you seed too far from delta k equals 0, you have an unsuccessful seeding where the other mode managed to oscillate during the pump duration. Here you have an experimental example. It's more, you can see that they seed the laser here, intentionally far from perfect the phase matching. And at first, you start on this mode, but eventually the other mode with more gain oscillate during the same pulse. And they do some modeling using this approach with a good agreement. So even if you are successful with seeding, you have to take care of other aspects. So if you are not seeding at delta k equal to 0, there will be a phase mismatch caused to the phase shift delta K times L on each pass through the nonlinear crystal, and this phase shift will induce you a frequency shift of your OPO. And so your OPO wavelength is not exactly the same as the seed wavelength. So you have to, here they did measurement at Sandia Labs, and you have, depending on delta K, the difference between seed and signal frequency. And you can see that they are not exactly at the same value when you are not at delta K equal to 0. And they also later do some modeling and comparison between modeling and experiment in good agreement. So if you don't need to have a very high resolution, you don't have to care a lot about that. But if you want to measure something more precisely, this effect can induce a frequency shift comparable to your line width. So it's not, could be not negligible. So a good technique to be able to measure this was developed to OPO mainly at Macquarie University, is optical heterodyne chirp analysis. So in this case, you do the seeding as I explained previously, but you take a little part of your injection seeding and frequency shifted by an acousto-optical modulator, and then you mix it with your OPO emission, and so you are able to measure a bit signal, and by Fourier transform, you are able to measure the instantaneous, or so-called instantaneous frequency during your pulse. And using this approach, in this team, they also, here you have example of the instantaneous frequency. So here I think it's for perfect seeding, and when you seed at delta K not equal to 0, you will have, in addition to the shift of the central frequency, you will have a chirp during your pulse. So it's effect you have to have in mind. And so up to now I explained you how to be single frequency, but for gas sensing you need to tune the OPO. So what you do, you tune your seed laser, and in the same time you have to maintain a coincidence of with the same cavity mode. So using that, you are able to do some tuning. And for broad tuning, since you need to be close to delta K equal to 0, you also have to change phase matching condition. So first example of successful use of injection seeded laser, it's been done at National Physical Laboratory in UK. So they developed here an OPO that is seeded by 2 lasers alternatively, so they can generate on and off wavelengths this way. At first, so it's laser at 1.5. So in this way, your idler is close to micrometer. Sorry, it's close to 3.3 micrometer, so corresponding to the main absorption line of methane. So first, they do some tuning. So in photoacoustic spectroscopy, they managed to measure the line of methane. And then they did a LiDAR measurement. They have 6 millijoules of pulse energy. And here you have the LiDAR traces with absorption in dot line and without absorption here in continuous. And so they were able to measure the concentration of methane with a good agreement with what it expected. So it's one of the first LiDAR based on injection seeding, I think, this one. And also, it's not an IP dial, but it's a real one with scattering from the aerosol. We have also nice work carried out at DLR in Germany, which is the analog of ONERA in Germany. So they do the very nice measurement of water vapor in an airborne system. I don't want to go to the details because I think I don't have enough time for that. And then to increase the power, they add optical parametric amplifier after the OPO. And this new work is done in the context of the French-German Merlin mission for methane monitoring from space. And here you have also optical heterodyne characterization. So injection seeding, just to summarize. So nice aspect, you have a low suggestion threshold. So you use a very simple cavity, and since you seed it, you have an even lower threshold than without seeding. You rely on well-developed tunable laser for seeding. You can do some fast switching if you use several seeders. But the bad aspect is that you tunability is limited by the tunability of variable CEDAR, so you cannot benefit from the full potential of OPOs because you can only emit at wavelengths where you have a seeding laser existing. If you want to do fast switching, you need to have multiple CEDAR. It's a counterpart of this one. And you need also to do some precise locking of the slave OPO cavity, and you need to be close to perfect phase matching. So the other approach is to use intracavity wavelength selective element. It's really, we say, you have your OPO cavity, and inside the cavity, you insert a diffraction grating or an étalon or so on to obtain single frequency emission because you have too much loss for the other modes. It's very classical in laser. Mainly, it's a transposition of techniques previously used in dye laser initially. And also, the first implementation date back to the early 60s. The first one by Kreuzer using an étalon is the same Kreuzer as the one that developed photoacoustic spectroscopy. So this guy was quite active. This time, they did a lot. And here you have, I would say, early LiDAR in Bayer's group in Stanford in the early 80s. So you have here a scheme of the OPO detector, and they use integrated path absorption using as a topographic target a building located at this distance. They have narrow enough line width to measure gases. And in this case, they measure temperature and humidity. To measure temperature, they use two lines of water vapors, and you can see here the variation of the strength of the two lines as a function of temperature. So in this way, you are able to get the temperature. And third, offline. And of course, with these two lines, you also are able to measure the concentration of water vapor. And so here you have a LiDAR signal where they were able actually to measure temperature and humidity. It was quite early and quite successful, but I expect it was also painful to have an OPO working nevertheless because subsequent progress has been very laborious and sporadic after this, and we really have to wait at least 15 years before having a kind of recovery or revival of the OPOs, thanks to the advance of nonlinear materials and the availability of reliable solid-state materials. So you have then new, so people re-demonstrate approaches with more reliable devices. Here you have two examples of, here it's a fully controlled OPO developed by Bosenberg. But nevertheless, just a few examples first. So here you have photoacoustic. And here you have a very nice system developed at Lund University where they put in a truck many laser and OPOs, and they were able to cover the full wavelength range from UV to mid-IR, and they did a lot of measurement with this quite bulky and quite difficult to maintain in operation, but it was nice results. And one last example on this kind of OPO. In post regime, it's much easier to reach the threshold, so you can have narrow line width OPO working at longer wavelengths. So here it's nice results from Vodopianov. It's not the first author, but it was in the team of Vodopianov when he was in INRAD. And they use so litho-mounted grating and a silicon étalon, and they managed to narrow the line width at typically 1.5, 1.2 wave numbers, which is also sufficient for measurement of here. As a demonstration experiment, they measure water vapor in a gas cell. But they stop here. Then there were no results on more, say, practical application. So this approach is very nice since using this tunable filter, you have access to the full potential tuning range of your OPO. You don't need any CEDAR. But usually you have a much higher oscillation threshold, at least 2 times higher due to the additional insertion loss. There is a notable exception with volume guard gratings, as we discussed this morning. But we still need to have a demonstration of volume guard grating for gas sensing. It's not have been done yet. And there is a kind of operational complexity since you have to move several parts synchronously. And also, usually you have single mode emission or widely tunable emission, but there are very few systems that deliver at the same time single mode and widely tunable emission. Okay, so now I will move to doubly resonant OPO. How to get a single frequency emission from doubly resonant OPO? That's what we did at Onera. So first, let's spend a few slides on what is the pulsed spectrum of single cavity doubly resonant OPO. So in this case, you have two mirrors that are reflecting the two waves, signal and idler. Sorry, it's still a C for complémentaire in French. Or complementary wave, which can be done in English as well. It has more sense than idler, actually. The complementary of the signal. And to understand what happens in this kind of cavity, you can use the so-called Germain and Miller diagram. So in this diagram, you plot the signal frequency with an axis growing in this direction, while you plot the idler with an axis growing in this opposite direction, in such a way that the two axes are coincident at half the pump wavelength frequency. So if you draw a vertical line, this frequency plus this frequency is always equal to the pump frequency. So you have the conservation of energy. So for this OPO to work, you need to be on a vertical line. Okay. So then you have cavity modes, okay, for the signal and the idler. Due to chromatic dispersion of the crystal, they are not exactly with the same free spectral range. So you can plot here. In green, you have the modes of the signal cavity. In red, the idler cavity. And to make the OPO oscillate, you need to have simultaneously signal and an idler on a vertical line. But they are different, but they are only slightly different. And so you still have, usually, in pulse regime, a multimode emission because you have a perfect coincidence, for instance, for these two modes, but the side modes are still overlapping because the fineness of the cavity is not infinite. And so you have a so-called cluster of modes in pulse regime with a multimode emission. So you don't want that either for gas sensing. So what we do to filter this emission is we use a dual cavity OPO, where you don't have the same cavity length for the signal and the idler. There are two cavities. And so the free spectral range of the two cavities is not exactly the same. In this way, you can have a coincidence for two modes. It's more clear here, signal and idler. And then the side modes are distant enough to avoid emission. So it's like in a caliper when you have only coincidence here and not for the other gradation. And if you properly adjust the cavity dissociation, you can have a very stable single mode emission. A good point is that you don't have any insertion loss. And also it's a doubly resonant OPO, so anyway you have a very low oscillation threshold. Actually we demonstrate we can pump this device with micro laser, or even recently we managed to pump it with a continuous wave laser diode. You still have to work a little bit more to secure these results. But. So this filtering technique is so-called Vernier spectral filtering. And very important parameter is the relative dissociation between the two cavities that must be of a few percent. So here you have an example of the first OPO that delivers single frequency emission in pulsed regime using this approach. So in this case, it was an L-shaped cavity. It was still called bulky in the early 2000s. And actually, I was involved in this paper as a master student at those times. So you can also imagine that's before my PhD thesis, because then I moved to another lab before going back to Onera. And we obtained a single frequency emission. Currently, we are using this architectures, which is more compact. So you have a signal is oscillating between M2 and M3. idler between M1 and M3, so you have a mirror that is shared by the two cavities. And also the pump is double passed, so we also have a very low threshold owing to this double pump pass scheme. Typical dissociation to have single mode emission is 5%. But you need a narrow parametric gain bandwidth. If you are at degeneracy with a 100 nanometer bandwidth, it's not working anymore because you will have other coincidence that will appear in your gain. But if you choose a proper bandwidth, you will have a really nice single mode emission. Here you have a typical view of OPO. So now we are working on the integration of this OPO. So we do some UV. So you put all the elements. You do some UV sensitive glue, and in this way you can put all your components in the good position, and then you glue them. And then here you have an example of an OPO with a pump laser. It's a small laser. And we just start to do some optomechanical preliminary test on an optomechanical assembly. So you can see that we check it, and it's not an OPO. It's just a mirror glue done. So next step is to make this with an OPO, but it's difficult to. It's heartbreaking because we are not sure that the OPO will survive after such a treatment. So how to tune the wavelengths? To tune the wavelengths of this kind of OPO, what you can do first, you can move, for instance, the idler cavity mirror using a piezo transducer. And this way you move one comb of modes. It's not a frequency comb, but anyway, it's mode cavities. And so you change the mode that is in coincidence with the mode of the other cavities that is not moved. And this way you can sample wavelengths. So here, it's not enough. You want actually to have points between. So how to have points between? You move the other piezo a little bit, and then you reduce the scan. And this way you can fill the gap. And as much scan you do, as high is your resolution. So you have an adjustable resolution. And of course, the price to pay is you have a longer scan if you want to have more points. Of course, at the beginning, actually, we did continuous frequency tuning by moving both cavity simultaneously, but it's quite difficult to do this on the broad wavelength range. And actually, for most applications, it's not useful. You don't need to have this continuous tuning. You just need to sample your absorption line. And here you have examples. So preliminary results with continuous frequency tuning. So here you have a theoretical spectra, and here you have measured absorption spectrum that has been measured here at low pressure. So the lines are narrower than at atmospheric pressure. With the same OPO, we are able to do all of these measurements. So you benefit from the tunability of the OPO. In this case, I'm not sure you have seed lasers that will enable you to do that. Now we are moving to photoacoustic spectroscopy, and we are investigating both photoacoustic classical cell and quartz-enhanced photoacoustic spectroscopy. Here, for instance, you have some preliminary results we have with quartz photoacoustic spectroscopy or more classical photoacoustic cell. We also pump, in this case, the OPO with a fiber laser, and we recently investigate the effect of the pump pulse shape and duration, mainly duration, on the efficiency of this doubly resonant OPO. It was a full-length paper that has been recently published. We observed an improvement when you use a rectangular pulse as a Gaussian pulse, as expected, since you already investigate that as well. Here it's a case of a doubly resonant OPO, and also in this case, owing to the fiber pump laser, we change the pump duration over several orders of magnitude. So we are already able to investigate how the OPO is working when you are pumping the microsecond or the nanosecond regime. And with this OPO, we also did nice short-range IPDIR measurements. So here you have a measurement of carbon dioxide. Here it's the same measurement I showed you earlier. And here you have the sequence of wavelengths emitted by the OPO when we did the Vernier sampling. So we emit sequence of wavelengths, and then you can use it. Another last result, we we also are involved in for spaceborne LiDAR, thanks to some interest from ESA and CNES in France. So we start with an OPO. For this application, we need to measure a carbon dioxide close to 2 micrometers. So it's close to degeneracy. So to have the Vernier filtering approach working well, we need to use a type 2 crystal, type 2 pipeline crystal, to have a narrower gain bandwidth. And then we amplify it. Here you have a type 0 pipeline preamplifier and 4 KTP crystals to reach 20 millijoules, typically at the required wavelengths. Here you have also. And now we have a collaboration that we start quite recently with KTH in order to replace all this crystal by only 2 PP KTP with large aperture. So we expect to have soon some results together. And here you have some example of spectral agility. Here we move the piezo from pulse to pulse. So here the laser is operating at 30 Hertz, so you can move pulse to pulse. And here you manage that, for instance, we are able to move from on-off wavelengths from pulse to pulse quite regularly. Here you have the stability. So here we demonstrate up to now stability better than 3 megahertz. So it's not the 1 megahertz, but nevertheless it's still much better than the duration or the Fourier transform bandwidth. Here you have a CMOS suppression ratio after amplification. So even if we use a high amplifier, we manage to maintain a high purity, which is not that simple, for instance, with the OPG approach. And here you have a first LiDAR signal we measure from the laboratory hitting in the atmosphere. So we have to wait. So the very last result on this OPO. Up to now, I only talk about OPO based on pipeline, but how to apply this concept for long-wave infrared. Okay, we are partly paid by the military guy, and they would like to detect other species. So natural approach is to replace pipeline by orientation patterning upgas, which is the analog of pipeline for the mid-IR. So it's so that what we just recently did in collaboration with Thales, that they mastered the growth of upgas, and also with Team Photonics, which is a laser company in France that is developing micro laser. They are not far from here. They are close to Grenoble, not very far. And in collaboration with Thales, they developed a micro laser emitting at above 1.8 micrometer to avoid 2-photon absorption in upgas. And here you have a picture of the OPO, here a picture of the first micro laser prototype. And the scheme is very similar to what we did, except the wavelengths that are not the same. So the threshold was 10 microjoule. So it's not, this laser delivers more than 100 microjoules, so it's not an issue to reach the threshold. Recently, we even managed to have a twice lower threshold. And in this case, we have currently a single period QPM upgas that is properly working. We are expecting to have more period soon. And we managed to obtain single frequency emission. We measure it with scanning Fabry-Perot interferometer. We measure the signal, and we check that the signal in single frequency, the pump in single frequency, so the LR should be single frequency. And we did some standoff measurement here on ammonia vapor in a cell. So here you have the spectrum of ammonia. We also measure water vapor, but since we are single frequency, you can discriminate easily between the two species. At the present time, it's only a standoff distance of 2 meters, but of course, the objective is to go at longer distance later. So, to summarize with a single mode, Christian will be perfectly on time. I only have one topic, which is quite short afterward. So, we have many advantages. For me, it's not hard to talk about advantage. So you have access to the full potential of tuning range of OPO. You don't need any cedar. It's a compact, very low oscillation threshold. it's heartbreaking for me, but I have to be honest, and also to have this advantage for my technology, because otherwise I'm not credible. So I think the one could be a disadvantage is that you always need to have a narrow gain bandwidth. So you at least to use type 2 fast matching close to degeneracy, which is not that good. For instance, for piplins, the effective is 4 times smaller, so meaning 25 at the square, it's 25 smaller efficient than type 0. And it's a low threshold, very nice cavity, but the energy from the oscillator cannot be scaled directly, so you need to have additional OPS stages. But we are quite confident to have very simple design for that anyway. So I'm finished with pulsed OPO, and just at the end of the presentation, I would like to discuss shortly on mode-locked OPO for gas sensing. So mainly synchronously pumped OPOs. So synchronous pumping is very different, even if it's also pulsed, because successive pulses are coherent. Basically, you start from a mode-locked laser that delivers a train of pulses, and then you adjust your OPO cavity length in such a way that when your next pump pulse is incident of your OPO, your traveling OPO pulse is synchronized with the pump pulse. So in fact, it is the same pulse that is traveling always in the cavity. So pulse to pulse, you have a coherence from one pulse to the other. So you don't expect to have a variation of the spectrum from one pulse to the other. You expect to have a steady-state spectrum fixed by so-called deterministic parameters, such as pump pulse, cavity, detuning of the cavity, nonlinear crystal, and so on. Only, of course, when you switch on your OPO, you start from noise, so you will have a noisy spectrum. But at the end, you expect this spectrum to tend to a steady-state value. And actually, we did recently we measure the pulse emitted by synchronously pumped OPO in the picosecond regime using a dispersive Fourier transformation. So you send your pulse in a dispersive fiber, and so you transfer your spectrum in time. And this way, we are able to measure. Here you have in this graph, in this waterfall, all successive pulses emitted by the OPO, and you see that they are reproducible from one to the other. So you have, I would say, coherence between pulse to pulse, which is very different from what you expect from an OPG. In red, we have a measurement with other. We have some difference between the two measurements, but nevertheless, you can clearly see that it is reproducible from pulse to pulse. So a first example is just to do FTIR using the OPO instead of a black body source. And this has been very interesting work in Derek Reed, the group in Heriot-Watt University. So at first, they use this, so they pump the OPO with a Ti-Fire laser. And here you have a typical synchronously pumped OPO cavity, which is very similar to a continuous wave OPO cavity. It's almost the same kind of cavities. And then they send the laser through a gas cell, and they use Michelson interferometer to measure the spectrum by Fourier transformation. And they have nice results. And more recently, they did the same kind of experiment at a remote distance of 1 or 2 meters. So you have the OPO. You first send it in this Michelson interferometer, and then you recover the signal here. And they were able, here you have the spectrum emitted by the laser. And they were able to measure lines of, here you think it's methane, or it's atmospheric absorption. So the resolution is still limited, I think, by the path length of the spectrometers. But there are quite interesting results with a good agreement between experiment and simulation. And here they were also able to measure vaporized nitromethane at 1 meter distance. So they vaporize this product on the target, topographic target, and they were able to measure this. And but here you can see that
the spectrum bandwidth, it's okay, but if you really want to do broadband spectroscopy, you still need to tune the OPO. So there has been also very interesting work that mainly has been done at Stanford University, where they use ultra broadband OPO. In this case, they use doubly resonant OPO exactly at degeneracy. And in this way, you can show that you have a locking mechanism between your pump and your OPO phase. And also, they managed to have octave spanning spectral bandwidth. So they developed two systems, one based on pipeline emitting at centered at 3.1 and another in upgas centered at 4.1. And in their experiment, they insert a gas cell inside the cavity, and so they do intracavity trace gas to trace molecular detection. And they have some very nice preliminary results. Also, you are able to measure the phase, dephasing. You have the line are dispersing life shape because your operation of your OPO is depending on the dispersion in the cavity. So nevertheless, they were able to inverse the problem. And their first result is at a sub-ppm level, which is fair, but they still have still need to improve it a little bit. For instance, for this kind of gas, for air quality measurement, you need to be at least the ppb level will be better. But it's a very nice device, and also they did very nice physics on the OPO on the paper. They published on that. And the last topic is dual comb spectroscopy. So I don't know if you already heard about this dual comb spectroscopy. But up to now, we send just a comb of wavelengths from the mode-locked OPO through the gas, and to be able to measure the absorption, you have to measure the spectrum, so we used spectrometers. But you want to have a much faster approach, and where you can also select more easily your resolution. So people really would like to do it in the time domain. Of course, in the time domain, you cannot measure directly the optical frequency because it's much larger than any detector's bandwidth. You can also think about heterodyne detection, so to have a single frequency laser and measure the beating with this frequency laser. But in this case, since you have a large broadband frequency comb, you still have typically 50 terahertz or something like that, so it's still too fast. So the very nice idea is to use dual comb spectroscopy. So for this, you need to have two lasers with frequency difference or interval between two teeth of your comb. So you have your first frequency comb, and the second one is with a slightly different repetition rate in such a way that the free spectral range is slightly different by this n value. And so when you mix these two combs on a detector, you will have beating between each couple of teeth of the frequency lines of each combs, and the frequency of the beating is given by the difference between the intermode spacing of your or interfrequency spacing of the two combs. And so this difference, frequency difference, is in the kilohertz to megahertz frequency range. So you can easily measure it using a detector, a classical optical detector. And so in the radio frequency range, you are able to measure your absorption spectrum directly. So this approach was first developed. There used to be a huge amount of work that has been done in NIST and as well in Ted Hange group with Nathalie Piquet in Max Planck Institute, and using mostly fiber femtosecond laser. But unfortunately, this kind of laser only emit around 1.5 micrometers, so you really limit your potential for gas sensing. So the first approach is to do a difference frequency generation. It's quite simple, but not very efficient, so you don't have many power.
So also still in Derrick Reed group, there have been a very nice experiment where they start with the same frequency comb in the near infrared, and they use this dual frequency comb to pump a single OPO. And to be able to do that, they use a long pipeline, 20 millimeter, which is very long for femtosecond regime. And thanks to the high group delay dispersion, this OPO can absorb the difference, also, of pulse repetition rate. And it is not exactly at synchronism with the two lasers. You have a midway between the two repetition rates. But anyway, your OPO managed to oscillate. And so you are able to deliver in the mid-air a dual comb using a single OPO. So it's much more simple than if you have two dual comb laser with two OPOs, and so here you are using the same, so they are sharing the same cavities, so they have the same noise, and so on. So it's very, very nice. And also you have much more power per lines. It has typically 1 micrometer per lines, while in this case it was 4 nanometer per line, nanowatt, sorry, per lines, and 1 microwatt, so much more. And here you have an example of simulation and measured. So you still need to improve the technique because here you have a somewhat big disagreement, but it's a promising approach for at least local sensing. Because to summarize, so the advantages, you have a broad bandwidth, so you can measure a full spectrum at each laser shot. You have a fast acquisition time, especially with dual comb spectroscopy, possible. In fact, your acquisition time is inversely proportional to your resolution. So to have high resolution, you need to have a long integration time. And the disadvantages could be, as I said, that if you have a very large spectrum, you need to have more power. And also, it's more for local sensing or short-range detection, but you cannot imagine to do very long-range LiDAR with this kind of dual comb. If you are using synchronously pumped OPO, it's still a device that needs to be stabilized, and so it's not that easy to put it out of the lab, and with a relative operational complexity. So to finish, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues and friends at Onera. So I use their photo profile in ResearchGate. So here it's only avatars, but I think that avatars telling you much more on the people than photo. So here you have Michel Lefebvre, which is actually my boss. So you know it's a mystery man. You have to maybe to do some research if you want to know his face. Jean-Michel Melconian, Myriam Rebaud, and Jean-Baptiste Darbecourt. I also would like to acknowledge everything I received from Emmanuel Rosencher, which was my former boss, who unfortunately passed away very early, 2 years ago. And he also put a lot on this research and much more. He was used to be the scientific director of the whole Onera at the end of his career. And to finish, we'd like to acknowledge students, PhD students, and postdocs. Some of them are in this room, I think. You can try to find your name. Colleagues from other labs that are from Onera that contributed to all the paper I presented from Onera. I'm also grateful to all the researchers who did a lot of variable work on this field, and it was very difficult for me to select. So I'm sorry for the people I forgot in this presentation, but I have a limited amount of time. Many thanks again to the organizer and for you to stay here, but the weather was not that good actually. So.